Welcome everyone to WEN's Redefining Energy's Future. I'd like to acknowledge the WEN Global Board with Andrea Tettleton as the president. And these are WEN's Advisory Council. We want to acknowledge their support of the Global Board with developing our organization to be sustainable that meets our strategic vision. Also, we'd like to acknowledge our corporate sponsors, Chevron, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, Williams, Woodside Energy, Baker Hughes, Siemens Energy, Capgemini, and Mitsubishi Power. In our upcoming events, on Monday, we have the executive package negotiation from the Thoughtful Co. And on Tuesday, we have our WEN Global Annual Business Meeting, where you can also see and vote for our upcoming slate for the Global Board. And also, our WEN podcast just dropped its latest episode on Commodities Are Our Future. And you can listen to the podcast from Apple, Google, Overcast, and Spotify. And for our today's event, we have Dr. Julia Neshwat, Vice President of Policy and Insights with TC Energy. Dr. Neshwat boasts over 2 decades of experience in international energy development and environmental policy, serving in 4 presidential administrations. As a former U.S. diplomat, White House official, and U.S. Army veteran, she emphasized energy source diversification and global energy security policies. Julia's expertise in clean energy and sustainability is demonstrated through her advisory roles on various corporate boards and as a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. Her public service culminated as a commissioner for the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. Earlier, Julia's tenure as Florida's first Chief Resilience Officer and her role in establishing the State Department's Energy Resources Bureau underscored her leadership. She holds degrees from Stetson University, Georgetown, and a PhD from Tokyo Institute of Technology, along with her decorated military service. To that, welcome, Dr. Neshwat.
Thank you for having me. And if I may say a big thanks to the Women's Energy Network and to you, Regina, for hosting this today.
And
would you like me to begin with some remarks, or did you want to jump into questions? What would you prefer?
Let me just share with everyone how we will go about the chat this morning. So I'll start with a few questions. And for those of you who have questions, just raise your hand and I will call on you to ask the question to Dr. Neshwat. So to start off with, I'd like to find out, what's it like to serve in 4 presidential administrations?
Oh, goodness. Well, it's amazing to see. Yes, everyone has different leadership styles and the various priorities may shift between what's number 1 and number 2 to what's number 9 and number 10. But I will say from the energy and environment standpoint, it's really interesting because it's not very different. It's all about how you communicate and message it, believe it or not, as I've learned throughout these different administrations and how that's approached, and trying to kind of have a whole of government approach to understanding how every department, every agency, how the private sector, and even non-government organizations come together to deal with various policy issues.
Interesting. And well, I don't want to ask, but did you have a favorite time with which administration you served in?
Oh, goodness. Look, they all had their pros and cons. You have to, try to think about it. Spanned off from the Bush administration and all the way to the Biden administration. And so between war, geopolitical events, each one, of course, had its own highlights. And again, it's all about how you react to that and how you approach that. So, I mean, we could spend a whole session just on that, Regina, to be honest. But I have to say, look, I also served under 5 Secretary of States ranging from Condoleezza Rice to Hillary Clinton. In fact, it was under her reign as Secretary of State where the Energy Resources Bureau was created, and it continued on throughout the Trump administration and of course, Biden administration to really come together and focus on energy from an international standpoint, as opposed to just thinking about it only in the United States and understanding how those geopolitical implications affect us here in the US, but and what does that really mean, and not just from a technology standpoint, but building those partnerships, building those collaborations. So I thought that was a very interesting time, when I was at the State Department, and being able to look at what energy diplomacy meant and how that really worked in building collaboration and information sharing.
And thank you for that one. How about you share with us what energy integration is about?
Yes. So, there's a lot of language out there, and you probably saw in my article that everyone tends to look at energy independence. It's been such a politicized word these days. But when you think about what's happening globally, the world is facing such a huge challenge to try to meet the rising demand for energy, at the same time, trying to reduce global emissions. So when you think about this resurgence of geopolitical instability, you have the Russia-Ukraine war, you have unfortunately what's happening now in the Middle East. I mean, all these different events has certainly also sparked this kind of renewed focus, I would say, when it comes to even national energy security around the world. And the reality is, no country can solve this global energy challenge alone. And that's where integration comes into play. Even the energy markets, they're all interconnected. So we have to really think about it from an integrated standpoint. Natural resources, they're certainly not evenly distributed across the nations. Energy supply chains are international, of course, and they're complex. And then you have emissions. They don't respect national borders when you think about it. So you kind of have to think about it when we look at those policies, and what are the regional energy solutions that we can work together that's transformative, and coming up with that type of strategy and having a vision. So I mentioned partnerships. That in itself will be so important when you're looking at these energy producing nations and countries and how they can come together towards those solutions. And then there's the innovations aspect of this. It's the key to solving these energy problems and challenges, and building those new connections that go beyond North America. If you're really trying to accelerate, if anything, that next generation of energy systems. So we have to think in a more integrated manner. We have to come together to really strengthen the energy security aspect of this, to accelerate those new technologies at home, and then yet position ourselves towards cleaner energy, which could be renewables or other alternatives for such solutions. And so, I can't help to think about one, how do we look at, and this is what I did when I was in government, developing a regional energy agenda that's cohesive, that has incentives, for example, looking at regional emissions targets and shared commitments to build critical energy infrastructure, which is critical. Secondly, looking at expanding the regional energy supply chains that can help shield us from geopolitical instability, which is going to bound to happen in one way or another. And then finally, trying to establish those global partnerships to explore cleaner energy and that next generation. It's a really exciting time, what's happening, especially in the Department of Energy and what they're doing. But that technology, being able to share that around the world globally, will helpfully build on that energy integration. So I hope that kind of answers the importance and the reasoning and how we can go about it, and why it's we really need to stay away from the term, even though we hear it a lot, on energy independence, and to really start thinking more from an energy integration standpoint.
And what's your take? I mean, there's a lot of conversation about energy transition and how ESG also plays a part into it. Should we still use the term energy transition in collaboration with energy integration?
Well, I would say we shouldn't focus so much on the fuel types or the source, and focus more on reducing those emissions, the emissions behind it. That's the key, and I think that's what would be very helpful towards the energy. Again, energy transition is used a lot here in Washington, D.C., and we'll probably hear it a lot at the COP28 that's coming up in December. But there's this pathway towards decarbonization. We have to be able to take a look at what is existing out there and how we can decarbonize and aim towards those goals, whether it be various targets, obviously depending upon the country or the industry. But I think that's more of the pathway that's realistic, especially for developing countries. I've traveled all around the world, and we talk about energy transition, but you think about countries in Southeast Asia or in Africa, and in fact, I was up at the up in New York for the UN General Assembly and got to meet the president of Rwanda, and his first comment to me was, transition from what if you don't have the basics already? So we have to kind of take that in consideration, that for some countries they may not have that existing infrastructure, and take that into account. So it's really important, while we certainly strive to decarbonize, that we understand that in certain places, while we want to have a cleaner energy path, and a sustainable path, we have to look at creative solutions also with existing energy technology.
All right. My next question: do you think our global supply chains are diverse enough? And what challenges do they face, and how can we overcome them?
No, that's a great question. When we think about global supply chains, it certainly plays such a crucial role in trying to ensure that reliability and the efficiency to have the basic access to energy resources of those technologies. And yes, there's challenges that exist in terms of their diversity and the resilience. But there's ways to kind of explore the challenges, and the potential strategies to try to overcome that. And let me start with this lack of diversity. And I know we hear about this theme quite a bit. So that is one key challenge to really, when you think about the over reliance on a specific energy source or even a region. Many countries heavily depend, for example, on fossil fuels, as you know, or this limited number of renewable energy technologies. So the lack of diversity can make supply chains very vulnerable to disruptions due to the geopolitical uncertainties, as well as market fluctuations or even natural disasters. In Florida, we dealt with hurricanes. In the West Coast, it's wildfires and whatnot. So we have to look at ways that are certainly resilient. And so to think about overcoming some of these challenges, I would certainly say promoting alternative energy is one of them, and of course, renewable energy sources being a big part of that. Really encouraging the development and the adoption of the diverse renewable energy technologies, such as solar and wind and hydro and geothermal, can certainly help diversify the supply chain. Another area, supporting innovation and R&D, will be extremely important. Being able to invest in research and development of the new technologies, I think, can help expand, if anything, that range of available options, and really reduce the dependency on a single source or region. And then finally, I'd say, encouraging interconnectivity. If you're able to develop interconnections between different energy grids and regions, that can certainly help enhance the diversity of the energy sources, and really promote, if anything, energy sharing during times of shortages or excess. And then you have infrastructure limitations is another challenge. Inadequate infrastructure can certainly hinder the diversification of the global supply chains. Again, for an example here, on the flip side, is with renewable energy, such as solar or wind. It can require specific infrastructure for efficient generation and for storage and distribution. So when you think about how to overcome that, you look at investment opportunities in the infrastructure development aspect. You have governments and private entities that could invest really in developing the infrastructure that could support those energy resources, such as like transition lines, storage facilities, and even charging stations for electric vehicles. So another area is to try to foster public-private partnerships. When you think about, for example, collaboration between government, it doesn't always have to be government to government. It can be government and private sector entities that can help really mobilize, I would say, the resources and the expertise to try to address some of the infrastructure challenges, and create that more diversified and resilient supply chain. Another challenge that gets brought up quite a bit is even regulatory and policy barriers. Inconsistent regulatory frameworks and policies can create these challenges on the supply chain, because this can really include these complex permitting processes. We hear a lot right now in Washington about permitting reform, and it's still kind of an ongoing endeavor in Congress even. And so we're certainly monitoring that. But there's this lack of incentives, and or these protectionist policies, and so we have to really look at that. But how do we overcome it? So easier said than done, but one would say, how do you establish, favorable policies, right? Being able to create, especially with the government side of the house, create, something that's more stable and supportive with the regulatory environments that can encourage, if anything, this adoption of diverse sources and technologies. Again, easier said than done. When you try to think creatively about what those incentives could look like, streamlining the permitting process and ensuring, more of an equitable market access. And then finally, in overcoming this, there's the international cooperation aspect, encouraging that collaboration and sharing best practices among the countries can certainly help align those regulatory frameworks. We're very closely watching what Europe is doing right now to try to overcome trade barriers and fostering that more diverse, interconnected supply chain. And then, I'm sorry, one last area that I'd be remiss to not mention is the environmental and even social considerations when you're looking to pursue, again, that diversity supply. It can bring environmental and social challenges such as like land use conflicts, environmental degradation, and even socioeconomic impacts. So it's also important to try to conduct some sort of, something comprehensive that, these impact assessments that can be done as well, and try to mitigate any potential negative consequences. And really engaging with stakeholders, and involving local communities. Indigenous groups are very important. Relevant stakeholders in the decision-making process can also help to minimize those conflicts, to bring about that diversity in supply, and being able to implement that in a socially responsible manner. So I think if you think about all of this, the combination of the policy interventions, the investments in infrastructure, the technology innovation, the stakeholder engagement, I think that can all help towards achieving that more diversified global supply chain. Again, easier said than done, but it's good to kind of have that pathway towards that. So when we think about that diversity, I hope that somewhat answered your question.
You mentioned interconnectivity between regions. Mm-hmm. Do you see that happening now here in the US or more overseas?
I see it more in the United States, although Europe, for example, we did a lot of work in the Baltics, and they were trying to build, especially in the electricity sector, they were trying to build their interconnectivity in that area, as opposed to just focusing on the western half of Europe, which is a lot more energy abundant. So that interconnectivity, it could mean electricity, it could be the grids. It could also mean, the pipelines and interconnectors there, in certain parts of the country that would rely on natural gas, as an example. So I think it can hit both, but we surely need a lot more in the United States. You don't see that as much with the states. Every state has their own local, state, federal, local state laws and permitting issues, but it certainly could be helpful if we could look at it from a more regional standpoint in the US. So a lot of lessons learned there.
My next question is on global collaboration. How do you envision countries collaborating for a sustainable energy future? And
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
And which countries do you think will be leading this change or charge?
Charge. Well, there are various means. That's the good news, on how countries can really work together. I mentioned this earlier. We talk about knowledge, information sharing, the technology sharing piece of this. Countries that do have advanced energy systems and tech can really share that expertise with others, and this can include collaborative research, for example, and development initiatives. There's a lot of joint projects that are out there, capacity building programs aimed at really trying to accelerate the adoption, especially on sustainable energy solutions. Policy coordination, again, easier said than done, having served in multiple administrations, but countries can collaborate to try to harmonize, if anything, their energy policies and the regulations. And again, this can also involve sharing best practices and trying to establish some common standards where you can also align incentives to try to facilitate the transition again towards a sustainable energy system. Uh, Financing and investment is another area. Having those collaborative efforts in financing and investment will be crucial, where countries can really work together to mobilize the funding for clean energy initiatives, establishing clean investment frameworks, as well as facilitating access to the finance for developing countries, which need it a lot. You see a lot of programs out there with the Department of Energy. They have a loan sharing program. The UN has quite a few initiatives as well. It continues to evolve, but I think tapping into some of those resources can be helpful with the financing and investment piece. Then there's also, which I learned a lot about when I was at State Department, the international organizations that are out there and agreements. Being able to participate and cooperate with these IOs, as I call them, are key really for that, for the global energy collaborations. So obviously there's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, or there's also, you mentioned Dr. Fatih Birol earlier, the the IEA, the International Energy Agency, but there's also the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, which is based in the UAE. They provide, avenues for countries to work together towards sustainable energy transition. So there's a lot of great international organizations out there that could also be of help. As for which countries are leading the charge, there are several nations out there that have taken great strides to try to promote this. For example, Denmark is one. They're known a lot for their wind power capacity and advancing their energy policies. They're actually a global leader right now in renewables overall. I know they've tried. I think their latest targets, they've tried to achieve 100% renewables by 2050, and has been actively working on developing offshore wind farms and implementing smart grid systems. I'm always cautious, however, when I see somebody say 100% of something, because to me that makes me a little worried about not having a backup plan. But at least they've got some targets, and again, they've been very advanced in their policies. Germany is a great case study on things to do and things not to do. I mean, they've excelled in some areas, but not in others. But they have truly made progress in renewables, but it has been a challenge for them because being very close to Russia and the reliance on oil and gas has been a problem because of high costs and so forth. So there are times when it's been very helpful, and other times not so much. But I know they've been at the forefront of solar energy, and so they do have a good amount of wind power associated. But I would just be cautious on that one, because they are still paying very high prices. Although I would say Sweden, though, is a great example. They've had a strong commitment to sustainability, and also transitioning to renewables as well, but doing it in a phased approach. They've invested a lot in hydroelectric power, which is another big one, and are trying to be climate neutral. I think their goal was 2045, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm sure a lot of that has shifted. And then, believe it or not, China has, it's funny because they're the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, but they've also emerged as a global leader in renewable energy, particularly in solar and wind power as well. So they've been looking at that now. A part of that is the critical elements and minerals. They do have like 90% of the world's critical elements in their country. So I think that helps for the renewables initiative. Whereas in other places of the world, you have that heavy reliance. But China has been leading that effort. Again, I don't know how long term or sustainable that will be, but that's to be said. But again, there are a lot of countries out there that are actively pursuing this. Unfortunately, U.S. is still not on the top of that list, but you definitely see a lot of European countries, as I mentioned, like Denmark and Sweden, who've been leading the charge and have established their own policies.
When you mentioned earlier about financing, right, and investments, what can you share about the IRA Act that was passed early this year?
Yeah, the IRA. Yeah, no, it was definitely breakthrough, and they have a lot of great incentives. I mean, the money's not available right now, but if you have the projects identified, I think this was a total game changer and an example for the rest of the world of the US's commitment towards clean and sustainable energy. So, if you have the time to read through it, it's pretty thick, but there are like elements for each type of source of energy, including nuclear, where there's incentives to move forward and have that support and the funding behind it. Like I said, the only downside of that is we have to take in consideration when it comes to renewables, the critical elements and where we can get that. And again, there's a heavy reliance on China for that. And so I think that's one challenge. But overall, with the IRA, it's like I said, it's such a great game changer and will help push and pave the way towards cleaner energy with all the various types of energy sources out there. So I think countries are still studying that and analyzing it. But I think it's something that's going to stick around even if there's a change of administration.
Going back to energy integration, so how do you see integration reshaping the next decade?
Yeah, there's quite a bit that can certainly reshape the next decade when you think about promoting certain synergies, if anything, and looking at efficient and flexible systems. For example, you just heard me talk about renewable energy. Well, renewable energy integration is very important, where you could look at existing energy infrastructure that could certainly lead to that more sustainable and resilient energy system. And it involves technologies like smart grids, energy storage systems, as well as this demand response mechanisms on what that means. And a lot of the industry can certainly benefit from that. You have developers when it comes to integration that can allow the renewable energy developers to really optimize their generation capabilities, if anything, and try to improve the grid stability aspect. You have energy storage providers where you have integration of the storage technologies that can help balance the supply and demand variations and try to really enable, if anything, the smooth integration of the intermittent renewables as well. And then there's the whole electric vehicle industry, EVs. I mean, integrating EV charging infrastructure can certainly benefit from renewables as an example, and grid integration that can lead to the cleaner transportation ecosystem. So that's one area. And then there's the decentralized energy systems integration, is what we call it, where you have this integration of distributed energy resources, such as like rooftop solar panels or small scale wind turbines and community microgrids. It can all bring about this localized and decentralized energy system. So this integration, I think, really will enable greater energy abundance, if anything, the reliability and the resilience behind it, as well as even the affordability aspect of that. So I would say renewable energy integration as well as the decentralized energy system integration are the two areas where I think will reshape the next decade.
Do you know of any companies now that are working on having energy or have projects for energy integration?
I know that there's a lot that where they can certainly benefit from. You have energy service providers, obviously, that's out there, where they can offer to customize their energy solutions specifically towards communities, and they really try to cater to their specific needs. Then there's the energy management technology providers. Those are the guys where you have this advanced energy management systems where they try to like optimize the utilization and integration of the decentralized energy resources. And then there's just the local communities that are involved with businesses where you have that integration that can really try to empower them to try to generate and manage their energy and try to, if anything, reduce their reliance on the centralized grids. So, as far as specific businesses, there's a lot of clean tech startups that are out there, for example, and they too can help innovate and develop like the digital solutions aspect for energy management and grid optimization and EV charging infrastructure. There's the IT industry, Data analytics companies that are out there, they too can benefit, where you need IT data analytic capability to look at like real-time monitoring, control of the systems. And even though I mentioned EVs earlier, the manufacturers, those businesses, I think when you integrate their infrastructure and the smart grid technologies, can also help with accelerating and adopting to the utilization of the EV industry. So those businesses, but I mean, I can go down the list of naming some of them, but those are the general sectors within the businesses, I think, where you'll see a lot of benefits with that. They're right now involved as we speak. And that's why it's such an exciting time, because they're creating such opportunities for these industries, like the technology developers and the service providers and businesses that are in the renewable energy field and storage, and of course the mobility and transportation piece. But a lot of people forget that the digital and IT aspect is just as important. And so being able to leverage all of that will certainly drive, I think, the innovation aspect of it.
Thank you. So we have about 25 minutes left. I'd like to open up the floor to our attendees who wants to ask questions. If not, I do have my list of questions. Is there anyone in the group who would like to ask a question for Dr. Neshwat? Well, just raise your hands, and I will keep moving forward with the questions. Okay. All right. So, and how might a shift from energy independence to energy integration affect U.S. relationships with key mineral supplying countries? Are there examples of successful energy integration models that the U.S. can emulate?
Yeah, no, look, a shift towards energy integration, as I was saying in my introduction, can certainly have strong implications, especially for U.S. relationships with key mineral supplying countries. Based on my past experiences in government, we aimed to try to diversify those energy resources and again, try to reduce dependence on the traditional fossil fuels, where there might be this increased demand, especially for certain minerals and metals used in renewable energy technologies and storage systems and EVs manufacturing. So this shift in demand could really impact the relationships with countries that are major mineral suppliers. So the U.S. certainly needs to build, I would say, if anything, a more robust or a closer partnership and collaborate with others, particularly because of the reliable supply chains for these critical minerals. So the cooperation piece of this is important with these countries, and that usually can entail like long-term trade agreements, joint ventures, investments in domestic mining resources. Again, all to help towards a stable supply. Some examples of energy integration models that the U.S. can emulate. For example, there's the EU, the European Union. They've made significant progress, if anything, in energy integration through their initiatives, such as the European Energy Union. Basically it's a framework that can promote the integration of renewable energy resources, cross-border energy trade. They have the development of interconnections between the member states. So that their experiences in the EU, it certainly has provided some valuable insights of what we're trying to do in the United States to really try to foster those energy regional energy integration and the market harmonization piece of it. There's also the Nordic countries, which I've been able to travel myself and meet with some of the officials out there, like Denmark and Norway and Sweden and Finland. They've established a strong regional energy coordination. There's a whole aspect of it, even to Arctic energy, which again, it could be another topic in itself, but they have interconnected electricity grids. They've also coordinated on renewable energy development, as well as facilitated like cross-border trade. And the integration has really allowed for resource sharing, improving their own energy security, and then even trying to facilitate the transition mainly more on the renewable energy sector side than anything. Australia, if we go back to the Pacific areas, Australia has successfully integrated a lot in their energy mix, in particular renewables as well. They've done a lot on, as you can imagine, they get a lot of solar power with rooftop solar panels, given that they get a lot of sunshine. So they have policies that support feed-in tariffs, for example, and net metering that have been enabled their consumers to generate and even sell their excess renewable energy back to the grid. So I think it's a great example. So there's this decentralized and consumer-driven integration model that, again, I think is a great example for the United States in engaging with our local communities and businesses towards clean energy. And so I think it's important, by studying these examples, learning from the successful energy transition models, there's a lot that the U.S. can do to collaborate and have that regional integration overall. And again, it always goes back to my favorite, the diversification principle, which is really important. So yeah, there's quite a bit as you think about the independence piece towards the integration piece aspect of that.
You mentioned about the critical minerals, right? So as we move forward with solar energy, with EV, so batteries, right? And so all those minerals that used to be abundant, now they are becoming critical, right? So now they've transitioned to becoming critical minerals. So how do we see, where will we mine is there enough to mine here in the US to even support our needs?
Yeah. Is there enough? There has been the geological surveys done. They do exist in the United States. However, some of that is protected federal land. So you'd have to talk to our Department of Interior, Secretary of Interior. And again, it goes back to permitting and what would be allowed and not allowed. In the meantime, though, there are other countries that have some of that abundance besides China. So that way you're not relying on a single source. And then again, that goes back to diversifying your supply chains and so forth. So the short answer is yes, we do have it in the U.S., but again, it's restricted. A lot of regulations right now. But there are areas where with the technology out there where they're trying to create even synthesize artificial type of minerals and elements that could be created. So that's going to take time. The Arctic region even has, as the ice is melting, there's now exploration. You're seeing companies and investors go up there to explore, especially in places like Greenland. They've got quite a bit up there that is being looked at as well. So it's quite the dilemma right now, and it's a great debate here in the U.S. on should we be going out there and drilling? Can we do it in an environmentally safe way? Depending on who you talk to, some would say yes, and others not so much. So depends where you stand on that.
I know as we grow, the population grows, our needs are,
right.
Our needs change, and the more we want to be comfortable, right? So batteries,
Exactly.
everything just increase, and hence the
And that's
global.
why, yeah, Regina, and that's why it's so important when we think about an energy source of any type, you have to think about it from the beginning to end between what's required, especially in the renewable sector, what's required from the processing, the mining of the elements to the refining aspect of it, so you have to look at it from beginning to end state and what does that entail and even the emissions behind that. And that's why I said early on, we really shouldn't focus on the specific type of energy or the fuel aspect of it, and more about the emissions that it produces and how we can alleviate that. That's the key, because every source of energy is going to have its challenges. There's not a perfect source out there. I mean, you can go on and on about what one source might be better than the other, or how one's cleaner than the other. Well, again, it depends on who you talk to. While it may sound great, there are certain aspects to it that have to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. I have one last question. So how do we keep our global community invested and passionate about this quest?
I love that question because I'm very passionate about these issues too, and I think it's great that we're having this discussion today, and I hope it inspires others, or at least gets you thinking about the questions and the issues that are out there. It's certainly not black and white type of ordeal when we think about the challenges and what we can do to meet our energy demand and doing it in a sustainable way. Well, so it's really important to kind of think about, for example, the education aspect and the awareness. Really increasing that awareness is really important. And, understanding the benefits, the role in achieving sustainability goals is crucial. And so I know there's some education campaigns out there. I mean, but we got to do a lot more in our schools and our universities, public forums. Having the accessible for information out there that can help people understand the significance of energy integration, and really try to encourage their active involvement. Trying to engage with other stakeholders, I think is important. I mean, there's such a diverse range of them out there, right? It's not just government. It's the businesses, it's civil society organizations, it's the public overall. All of this is so important, in trying to foster like this kind of a sense of ownership, if anything, and shared responsibility. I mean, it's all our responsibility. So we have to encourage the participation. We have to facilitate dialogues like we're doing today. We have to consider that diverse perspectives too. Not everyone's going to have an exact agreement, right? That can try to generate the enthusiasm and a healthy debate, and maintain the long-term investment. And then the other thing is, it's not all gloom and doom. We have to demonstrate success stories too, and that's why it's important to have these great examples of highlighting successful energy integration projects and the positive impacts it's had, that can inspire and motivate others. So sharing the case studies that you brought up earlier, showcasing a lot of these innovative approaches and highlighting the economics behind it, because it does have a cost, as well as the environmental benefits. I think that in itself can help with the enthusiasm and demonstrate really the feasibility of the energy integration. I've got a few more if I can continue, since I think we still have time. Incentives and support, providing a little bit of that, I think, certainly can encourage investment and participation. And what I mean by that is like the financial incentives. And again, I use renewables as an example. There are subsidies or grants for research and development. There's tax benefits, capacity building programs. Again, all of this can help create that kind of supportive environment. And that really would reward, if anything, and acknowledge the contributions that can help create the sustained community interest in that involvement. And then there's also the international initiatives. There's ways at the international level where we can be collaborative. And again, some of that's going to be through international agreements. Sometimes you see these joint statements. They're not always binding, but still, I think it's a good step in the right direction, with partnerships and a lot of conferences that are out there that can build those strong networks, share those best practices as well, and have that knowledge exchange, if anything. So, like I said earlier, there's a lot of initiatives out there, like the UN Sustainable Energy for All, SE for All. I used to work on that project when I was at the State Department. The Clean Energy Ministerial. There's again, a lot of various regional energy cooperation platforms, again, that can also foster this sense of shared responsibility and have the global engagement. Another area which I think is important is public communication. You asked me about having worked in multiple administrations. Some administrations were better at communicating than others. So how do you do that? How do you have the public communication and the storytelling piece of this, right? So we have to have those effective communication strategies, have clear messaging, and storytelling, even if it means engaging in like these media campaigns. I mean, some of it, of course, costs money, but I think it certainly can at least capture the attention of our younger folks, or younger generation, if anything, when it comes to issues such as climate change and energy security and the sustainable development goals. All of this can create, of course, this sense of urgency and that shared purpose, which is important. And then it's kind of a very kumbaya statement, but empowering local communities. I still think we forget to think about what's around you, looking at your neighbors, is certainly crucial in maintaining the investment and the passion behind that. Again, whether it's with indigenous communities, having folks have a stake in the decision-making process, so you have that buy-in. And it provides economic opportunities, of course, when it comes to the planning and the implementation of energy projects. So you want to, again, have that sense of ownership and the long-term commitment. So yeah, I know I gave you just a whole laundry list, but if we can prioritize some of this, right, the education piece of it, the stakeholder engagement, the showcasing of the success stories, providing the investments, again, easier said than done. Effective communication, which I think is really important, and we're lacking that in a lot of ways. And then finally, empowering those local communities. I think that really can help with the passion for the shared and the enthusiasm for those shared requests. And again, it all goes back to that energy integration piece of it. So if anybody wants to volunteer and jump on, let me know. We can certainly use more of that and getting out and about, whether it's on social media or TV or doing these forums. I think it's just so important. And again, very, very grateful to be part of this and to share some of my thoughts. And again, it's not easy, but if we could all be beating the same drum towards that same path, I think it can certainly have a ripple effect.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nashwat, for the conversation. I think it's about time we have this conversation, because the conversations I've just been hearing about is just usually energy transition, ESG. And I know there's more to it than just that. So hence my invitation for you to come in today. To that, are there any more questions from the floor? Because if not, I'll let Dr. Nashwat go, have her back for her time.
And I would say, Regina, if anyone thinks of anything later on, this doesn't have to be a one-off. You're more than welcome to pass my contact information. Okay. If anyone wants to pick my brain or just has questions, I'm happy to give you my thoughts and ideas. So I welcome the network. Maybe through you, Regina, they can reach out if they think of anything later down the road. But it's not a problem at all. I'm thrilled that this is being raised, and again, it's important to stay engaged.
I greatly appreciate your time for taking time for today. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.